What's going on, YouTube? Welcome to the shop. Got a 8x8x8 LED 3D cube project. I got this out of the Hacker Boxes 0030. Been wanting one of these for a while. Actually, I've been wanting one ever since I saw Great Scott build one, and this came in this month's box. So yeah, I'm gonna put this together. You can find these on eBay for about 20 bucks. Has about 512 LEDs, circuit board, and integrated circuits. It has everything. It's fairly straightforward. Most people know how to put these together, but I would like to say one thing about the little modules here. In fact, I think this one's broken. Interesting. Let's see if we get a little closer. If you look on the board, let's see, I need something to point with. If you look on the board, the silk screen, there's a little notch right there. There's also a little notch right here. So you want to make sure you put notch with notch. And same thing with the actual chip. If I can get it to focus. Yeah, right there's a little notch. It's not on that end. It's only on one end, so you match up the notch. Maybe, yeah. Not sure why I'm holding the spool in this, but there you go. Anyways, you'll notice that I'm like right there. You see, I changed the size of the spool. I went from 20 to 30 thousandths. You'll notice through there I use both with the sockets. You know, since the sockets are fairly deep, you know, I was trying to put more in than with, say, the resistors or something. It doesn't need as much, so you know, like I said, you'll see me switching back and forth between the two different sizes. The large resistor with the multi-pin resistor, it's not polarity sensitive, so you can put it in either direction, and you don't have to worry about it. the crystal and the two ceramic capacitors. They're not polarity sensitive either, so you can put them in either direction. Do yourself a favor and keep the leads that you trim off. You're going to need those later to help reinforce the cube. Pack of 8 resistors goes on the bottom with the sockets, and they're not polarity sensitive, so you can put it in any direction, and the pack of 2 go on the other side. propping the board up with the header pins underneath so I can get a couple pins soldered. Make it a little easier. Need more than two hands for something like this sometimes. Two resistors go in the two slots that are left open. Decided not to use the red LED that came with the kit. I had a blue LED that's not diffused, and I didn't bother to change the resistor because I wanted the LED not to be at its full brightness. It turned out pretty good. I like it. Also, you'll notice too when I put this LED in there, I'm not putting it all the way in like I did with the resistors and everything. It's standing off just a little bit. The electrolytic capacitors, they should be the same value for both of them. There's a white stripe on one side. You want to put that facing the white mark on the circuit board, and the white mark is the negative. This isn't a very fun part of this, but I will say this. It's hard to explain, but when you're cutting them off the strip, if you can be as close to the one next to it when you cut it, then that one should peel right out. There's a little technique to this, and it goes by a lot faster if you just try to, work with it. Because like right here, I'm just cutting it straight down the middle, and some of them are popping right out, and then some of them I'm having to basically break out and cut out. But I got, about halfway through there, I realized that, if you can just cut close to the next one to where there's almost nothing left, and it will just peel right out. So, it's a little bit of trial and error, but just try it and see what happens. I want to show you how I bend these leads for this. I like to place the LED in my index finger in between my thumb like that. The positive on my left. So we can get this to focus. And I just bend the positive down with my fingernail. And then I turn it to the side to see if it's pretty much a 90-degree that way. And then I take some scrolling pliers, which are the round type, and I kind of focus. Kind of want it. We want a 90, so sorry about that. The memory card got full. What we're trying to do is basically I want this lead to touch the bottom of the scrolling pliers. I don't want to put it all the way up to the top because of the way I've already been bending them, and I kind of know where I have them now. So you got a 90 that way. So if you look at it that way, and then all you do is just bend it over like so. Now you have a 90 that way. I don't know if that made sense or not. As I was saying, here's the reason why. So we have our little jig. And what you're going to do is in the jig, when they're bent in such a way, is they will go right here. So the negatives, cathodes right there, anodes positive. And to solder them up, you're just going to stack them. So that lead goes on that one. And as such, you just keep adding leads. And same thing on the top here. If I was adding a second row, this would go under. You solder it right there. Pretty simple. I'm going to bend a few more just so you can see how I do it, in case you didn't get it the first time. Focus. So you have it in your finger as such. The short lead is the negative, the long is the positive. Just bend it down with your fingernail till you have a 90-degree or thereabouts. Take your scrolling pliers if that's what you're using. I highly recommend them. You can get some cheap ones at Walmart in the beading section. They're not expensive. And just run it over, and then you got a 90. using a little stack of plastic dividers and a quarter and a breadboard there to help position the leads so you can solder them. I couldn't get them to settle, in a reasonable amount of precision at all, unless I, the first two, basically, I had to prop up on something, and you're probably gonna have to do the same thing. You really want to test out the LEDs before you install all of them. You can do it individually like this, or what I like to do, or did do during this, is I did a row of 8 and then I tested those 8 and then I put it aside. Works a little better without the AC running, but hey, it comes on. Ain't nothing I can do about it. just a real quick note. You see me trimming the leads right here. I trim all the leads except for the bottom 2 on each stack of 8. And that just and the reason why I do that is because when you put the leads in there to solder them, they're just long enough to where they kind of go over the LED, and if you trim them, they'll stop right before the LED. And I found that it makes it a little easier to solder them up, especially straight and stuff. And also, I didn't want the heat to affect the lead itself, so you know, like right here, you can see that I didn't trim these, and they'll go in a little further. And like I said, the first 2, the first one is the ones that plug in to the little sockets on the circuit board, and then I leave the second one long just to give it a little bit more robustness. But then I'll go ahead and trim the next row and the next row all the way up, just to make it a little easier. You may want to do that, you may not want to. It's up to you. you get a one of these pins that aren't aligned well, take one of the take one of the leads that you cut off from the capacitors, and it will actually shove down in there. And unfortunately, I'll wait for my iron to warm up for a second. But if it's not straight, you can, like I said, just put the wire in there. Place your soldering iron up against the side and use that wire to slowly bend it straight, and then you can let it go and it'll cool, and now it's straight. Make yourself a little jig out of a jumper, or bend some wire to 15 millimeters inside, and you can clasp that over the leads there, the ones you're trying to solder up, to space them out properly so they're as even as possible. Unfortunately, I didn't think about doing this the very first couple. I got the idea from watching another guy on YouTube that was making one of these. He used the same little technique, and it works great. Like I said, you should definitely try to do it at the beginning, because it's a real pain in the butt to try to use a ruler to set it up, and it's a lot easier to just use one of these little jumpers, or like bend a wire or something for it. Also, you'll notice too that some people will cut the negatives off and then solder the pieces they cut off. I didn't want to do that. I just bent them, and it's not extreme. It's not very easy to bend them, but I just thought it'd be a lot more rigid this way, and hopefully it'd be a little faster, because you're not having to solder two joints. You're only having to solder one, because you're bending one side and soldering one side. So. This is how I was trying to do it at first, and it's not easy, especially when you're working by yourself. So try the jumper. It's a lot simpler. Yeah, this wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, but I still think it's more rigid. I might be wrong about that. It might be easier to, and faster, to just solder, just to cut and solder. But maybe next one if I try another one, I'll try it that way. here I deviated from the from the wire that came in the box with this thing. It came with some, I think, 24 gauge stranded wire. I had some 24 gauge solid, and I like the solid better because it just slides right into the little sockets, and it's a little bit more rigid, so it'll stay straight by itself more readily. So you're going to need 8 ground wires, and they're all going to be different lengths because you have to put one wire to each section of 8. So there's 8 sections, so 8 wires, and this is on the ground side, obviously. Bending these things really isn't the easiest thing to do, especially after they're soldered up, because the part closest to the LED is a lot thicker because you actually have 2 wires. So it can be a little bit of a chore to bend them straight, but I still think it's a little bit easier than soldering both sides. Once you get them all bent, now you have to solder them all. You have to solder each row on the negative side. This part's optional, but I highly recommend it. You take the leads that you cut off from the resistors and the capacitors, and you use those to reinforce the other side. So you take your little gauges that you made your 50mm jumpers, you space it across, and you put one of those leads and jump across each row and solder them all up. It makes a huge difference in rigidity. You don't have to do the bottom, just the top seems to be fine, but definitely highly recommend it. And then when you're done, this is what happens. If you look here though, there's 4th row down from the top, there's 3 sections that are not lighting up. I forgot to solder one of the ground leads on that side. But it was just one, and from looking at it, you really couldn't tell that it wasn't soldered because there's so much solder on the leads themselves anyways. But just took me a second to find it, and and here's the result.